I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have a special guest. She's award-winning historical fiction novel, no other than Miss Amy True. Amy, can you please introduce yourself?
Well, first, I want to say hello, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me on your wonderful podcast. I got a chance to listen to a couple of episodes earlier today, and I was really impressed. So, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So, my name is Amy True, and I write contemporary romance. My first book is actually the first book in a series, a contemporary romance small town series. It's called Meet Me in Ivy Falls. It comes out June 25th. And the story behind it is that it's about a small town girl who has gotten away from her home and is drawn back and to the town and pretty much doesn't want to be there, but has to stay. And some pretty funny things ensue when her ex that she hasn't seen in 10 years shows back up. So it's a fun romance for anybody who loves second chances, who loves ex-childhood sweethearts, who loves, forced proximity, anything like that. It's a very happy book. It does, of course, deals with a few serious issues, but for the most part, it's romance, so it has a happily ever after, which I really love.
Oh, yes, that's great, and that will be amazing novel for sure. So, Miss Amy, can you tell us about your award-winning piece? Why you won the historical fiction novel?
Sure. So I'm writing as an adult as Amy True, but I write historical books as Amy Trueblood. And that's actually a very interesting story. When I first started writing, my first book was speculative, and I kind of played with a bunch of different genres when I was perfecting my craft. And I never intended to write a historical book. That was not in the cards for me. I'd never imagined that. And then my family went to Chicago, and we went to the Museum of Science and Technology, which is an awesome museum in Chicago. And I walked inside the museum, and there was a plane hanging from the ceiling. And I was like, okay, that's really strange. I didn't expect that. So I climbed the stairs up to the top. And what I didn't realize until I got closer to the exhibit was there was actually a woman hanging from the plane. And I was like, okay, that's really weird. So the little plaque next to the plane said the name of a woman. Her name was Ethel Dare. And she was basically a wing walker in the 1920s. She basically hung off planes for a living. She would traveled with a flying circus, and I immediately, my bright writer brain, wanted to know everything about this woman. Wanted to know if there were other women who did this. So we went back to the hotel that night, and in the late morning hours, I was on my laptop researching everything I could, and I just thought, this is a book. So that ended up being my first book, Nothing But Sky. And I just fell in love with historical research, and I am the queen of finding really weird rabbit holes for research. So I find myself studying odd things about how to make bathtub gin and all these crazy things. And so I really fell in love with historical books. And my follow-up book is called Across a Broken Shore, and it takes place in 1930s San Francisco. And it's about a girl whose parents want her to be a nun, but secretly at night, underneath the covers of her bed, she reads medical texts. And because of a family incident, she finds out there's a female physician practicing in her neighborhood in San Francisco. And so she secretly sneaks off during the day and basically is mentored by this woman. And the woman happens to be also caring for the men who are building the Golden Gate Bridge. So it's a really cool thread of her story. And as she's growing as a person and growing into the woman that she wants to become, the bridge is also growing too. So it's a kind of a really cool parallel as a writer to kind of be able to do the character arc along with the building of this like historical monument in US history. So it's a pretty cool thing. So yeah, so I love historical books, but it's hard to write historical books. It's a lot of research. It's a lot
Yes.
of research. It's a lot of time. And so I just really like wanted to write a palate cleanser book, just something really fun where I didn't have to stop every 10 seconds to look up if something was like historically accurate. And I had been watching during the pandemic. I had been like everybody else. I was home and I was watching a lot of HGTV. And I fell in love with the show that was all about a small town and this couple, like, saving historical homes in their town. And I thought, oh my gosh, again, like with Nothing But Sky, I was like, there is a story here. So that's sort of how Meet Me in Ivy Falls was born. And I just really love the idea of like a really strong-minded female contractor who like knew her stuff and knew how to save these houses in her small town. And so it sort of just bore out of that idea. And then as the idea built, I started to build this small town of Ivy Falls. And I have this really bad habit of writing minor characters that are only supposed to be on the page for a second. And they end up like taking over like the entire scene. So Ivy Falls is filled with lots of really fun characters too. And I don't know if your listeners are familiar with the kind of the cult classic show Gilmore Girls, but that
Oh,
show is
yes.
that show is filled with lots of funny kind of really endearing but sort of busybody characters, and there's definitely a lot of those in Ivy Falls too. So in fact, there's a very funny scene in Meet Me in Ivy Falls which feels very Gilmore Girls-ish, and hopefully if your listeners pick it up, they will spot that scene right away. So yeah, but very fun, very different to write than historical, but so much fun. And every time I go back, this is the first book in a 3-book series, and I'm deep in the weeds on book 2 right now, and I'm really excited to get back to the town every single time I open my laptop. So it's been a great experience.
Congratulations, Miss
Thank you.
Amy, for sharing your talents to the world. So, what is your short-term and long-term goals in writing?
So my short-term goals, I think, are to finish out this series. Writing a series, if you've ever talked to anybody who's writing a series before, it's a mind-boggling thing because there's this little thing called continuity. So whatever you share in the first book, you have to make sure is consistent in the second book, and the third book. So I found myself writing this cute little Ivy Falls Bible so that I can remember what everybody's job is and what everybody's hair color is and what everybody's eye color is. So my short-term goals is to finish out the series strong and really get readers to the point where they fall in love with these characters and they just want to be coming back to the town. And my long-term goals aren't that lofty, but I think if you talk to any sort of mid-list writer, they'll tell you the exact same thing, which I'm going to say, which is I just want to keep selling books. I just want to keep writing and selling books and having editors buy my books and having my agent continue to love what I'm writing and support what I'm writing. I have the greatest agent in the world. She's fantastic. And so I think my long-term goals are just to continue to write and sell books. I know a lot of people probably say, I want to be a New York Times bestseller. And of course, every writer wants to do that. But for me, I think I have to write. Like I have so many stories. I have like a book Bible where I write down all my ideas of things and stories I want to write. And I think as a writer, we just want our work to get into the hand of readers. And so I guess my long-term goal is just to continue to write so I can continue to connect with readers.
Looking forward for more books to come, Miss Amy. So, what initial steps should one take to begin the process of writing a book?
I think it's so funny because I've been doing this so long now, and I sort of started in the heyday of like Twitter, when Twitter was just like this fun sort of place. Well, I guess it's called X now, but was this place where like you could find other writers and you could find like-minded individuals, and it was this great place to sort of like find other people who are writing in your category and genre. And so now my thought is that when you start to write, that maybe you should not go on social media so much because there's so much chatter about what are good and what tropes sell and what books sell and stuff like that. And one of the things that I found that I really loved is when I wrote my first book was I didn't have any of that chatter in my ear. I just sort of wrote for the love of writing. So I would say anybody who's starting out, keep your social media to like a minimum and just sort of fall into the story and fall in love with the craft of writing first. And then once you get to a point where you've got a finished and polished manuscript, you need to learn more about querying and basically the business of publishing. That's really a good time to sort of enter the social media sphere. But hold on to the joy and the love of writing just for yourself and for the story as long as you can to start with. And then when you have this polished, beautiful manuscript that you're ready to send out into the world, then definitely allow the chatter to sort of enter. But I would just encourage anybody who's starting out writing is just fall in love with the book first, fall in love with the story first, and then let everything else come after that.
Very well said, Miss Amy. So, how important is outlining before diving into writing the first draft?
So, I know this kind of sort of been chattered about this word or whatever, but I love it. I'm what they call a plantser. Like I plot, I have an outline. Now I've written a book now just basically on proposal. So I know how important it is to write a synopsis. I actually, when I sold the Ivy Falls series, I actually had to have a pretty extensive synopsis for all 3 books. So when the editor, the publisher were looking to see whether or not they wanted to purchase it, to see kind of how that book was going to sort of fall out. So I plot and I have a very, sure trajectory. I know all the romance beats. I know all the regular beats that need to be hit in fiction. But I have this thing where I write and I'm sure a lot of writers will say this too, where my characters just sort of take over. They just are like, so what if I did this? Or I'm going to say this now, and it's going to totally throw off your whole entire idea of who I was before I came to the page. So I don't like to say I'm a total full on plotter because I think that to me feels super rigid. I like for there to be room to move. So I like to say I'm sort of a plotter and a pantser together, thus plantser. So I have an idea and I really know where the story goes. And I am a very type A personality, and that means I'm a very linear writer. God bless people who can write like scenes out of order. Like my brain does not work that way. So I plot from chapter 1 to chapter 30 or whatever it's going to be. But I always leave room for imagination and for joy and for let my characters sort of speak to me and tell me what they want to happen in the scene. Because a lot of times I'll just let the dialogue go and the character will say something on page and I'm like, really? That really messes with my plot now, but I'm going to follow that and see where that goes. So, yeah, plotting is important. You have to have an idea of a beginning, middle, and end. But again, I think it's always good as a writer to give yourself room to move.
Well done, Miss Amy. So, what techniques can help in developing compelling and believable characters like your Ivy Falls?
I think vulnerability is a really huge thing. I listened to a writer at a writing conference once say that you could never allow your characters to sort of be this Mary Sue character because nobody in life is all good and all, good and bad. People are black and white and shades of gray. And so when you're writing your characters, you always have to remember that, right? And so for me, it's always been about putting a character in a situation and then thinking of all the myriad of choices that they could make. And a lot of times, in order to make a character vulnerable, in order to make somebody recognize themselves in that character, in order to make a reader, sort of empathize or understand or root for that character, you have to allow them to make mistakes. You have to allow them to make really bad choices on the page. In fact, I have a sticker on my laptop that says, bad choices make good stories. And it's true because you have to always be thinking about the the character's not real, right? It's fictional, but you have to think of it in terms of people falling into the story and seeing that as a real life person. And so in real life, humans don't always make the right choice. Humans don't always take the best path for them. And so when I'm thinking about writing compelling characters, I'm always thinking about what is the most strategic but also vulnerable and human choice that that character could make. And like in Ivy Falls, my main character, I love to write like really witty banter and like really like sharp cutting dialogue, especially for my females. And there are some points where you have to draw this character, but then you have to remember that in order for the reader to really, empathize with that character, they have to show vulnerability too. So I tend to just write full out how I see that character. And then in next drafts, I add the bad choices. I add the vulnerability. I add places where that character feels really, really human. And I think that that's important. And I think allowing readers to see that human doesn't always make good choices makes them root for them even more. And when you're at the end of the book, you really want your readers to have your main character succeed. You want them rooting for them, like I said. And the only way you can do that is to allow them to make mistakes and bad choices.
Interesting idea, Miss Amy. Mistake make you perfect, as they said. Before we go on, Miss Amy, I want to shout out my uh, countries listening to me, especially in New Zealand, because in Auckland I get 44% audience share, Wellington at 21, Canterbury 16, Nelson, Bay of Plenty, Waikato, Taranaki, Southland, Northland, Chat Island, or Chatham Island.
Very
Thank
cool.
you, New Zealand, for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower writers, authors all over the world like Miss Amy True. So, Miss Amy, how does one choose the right setting for their story, and why is it important, like Ivy Falls?
For me, setting his character. I think that one of the things that's really been interesting to me is when I went to college, I was trained as a journalist. So I write, I was trained to write no detail, like, just give me the facts, ma'am, and, straight story, no extraneous detail or anything like that. So when I started writing fiction, I had to figure out how I was going to sort of get away of this mindset of writing like a journalist and writing instead of writing like a fiction writer. So my first drafts are super, super thin. Like I just write bare bones. And then the following drafts is when I add things to the story. And for me, setting is always character. And how I achieve that is like I'm really very into visceral details. So I want you to be able to smell what it likes and what it smells like in Ivy Falls. I want you to be able to touch the turning leaves if it's fall or the magnolias when it's spring. I want you to be able to smell the chocolate chip cookies coming out of the bakery on the corner. So for me, adding those sort of visceral, details to a book really allows you to bring setting to life. I think the other thing too is to really talk about like the history of the town. One of the big things for me is when I talk to newer writers and they talk about like writing contemporary. They're like, I like writing contemporary because you don't have to do a lot of research and all this kind of stuff, but you do because you're trying to build this fictional place, and the fictional place has to be based on something real. And so for me, it's kind of taking a setting, making it real, and then actually adding those specific little details about what makes that town unique and what characters can see. And my publishers in the UK, Hera, and then my publisher in the US, Arc Manor, Kasich Romance, they've both done a really good job of supporting my ideas about covers. And so when you see the cover for Meet Me in Ivy Falls, I mean, it is a perfect representation of what I see this little like Tennessee town looking like. So for me, it's sort of in my head. I know what it looks like, but my job as the writer is to make that setting so real that when characters read about it on the page, they can actually see it in their head.
Yes, very well said, Miss Amy. So,
Thank you.
what are effective ways to build a plot that keeps readers engaged from beginning to end, like Ivy Falls?
I think it always starts with like a question, right? I think one of the things that writers always ask, or what starts the nugget of a story, is that what if. So I'm always starting with that question of what if. So for my historical books, it was, what if this girl Wing Walker, did all these daredevil stunts so that she could, reach her dream. And Across the Broken Shore, it was about, what is this main character willing to risk in order to, achieve being a doctor. And so in Ivy Falls, it was all about returning to home, not being the person you were when you left. And how do you know, translate that to the page? And what is that like? And so I feel like if you're asking those what if questions and you're sort of dangling that sort of thread of, I need to turn the page, so I know what happens next, I want to turn the page. And another great writer that I heard speak once at a conference said, you should always try, and this is difficult to do and you can't really do this all the time, but you should be thinking about it, is trying to end every chapter like on a cliffhanger, or a question that gets, or a thought that gets the reader thinking, oh, I got to turn the page. I want to see what happens next. And I have a critique partner that I've had that we meet every week. We swap pages on whatever book we're working on every week. And her continual notes to me every single time at the end of a chapter is, this feels sort of packed. Why don't you make it so that it's more of a cliffhanger? Why don't you do this and that? And she gives me some great examples of how I can make it a more cliffhanger type of chapter ending so that you can get the reader to turn the page. So I think always asking that what if question and dangling it out there for the reader. And also too, back to your original question, making them love the characters, right? They fall in love with the characters on the page, they're going to keep reading because they want to see what they're, if you're a traditional romance writer, are you going to give them a traditional third act breakup, and are they going to get their happily ever after? And that's the great thing about romance too, is that requirement that there's a happily ever after. So even if you're putting your characters through the ringer, the reader knows at some point at the end they're going to be together. It's just your job as a writer to make it really difficult to get there. So that's the great thing, and I think that's the crux to bringing the reader along, is to be having them asking, what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next.
Yes, indeed. So, Miss Amy, how would you ensure that the Ivy Falls theme is clearly communicated and impactful?
It's funny because I don't think I started out this book. I never start writing with like a clear theme in mind. And then after I get through a few drafts, I'm like, and then my agent, my critique partners read it. They're always like, did you know that you did X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, no, but okay. You know what I mean? And a lot of times, it's interesting, but a lot of times my books somehow have a character working through some sort of grief, some sort of family thing. Family is a really big deal to me. Family, whether it's found family or big families, found family, Nothing But Sky, big families in Across the Broken Shore. In Ivy Falls, it's family as in like a big support network of the town. So I always try to think about what is important to that character and what is the task that they're trying to work through in the book. So for Torran, who's the main character in Ivy Falls, it's letting go of the past, that's really hurt her, whether it's a broken relationship that she has with her father, or it's about this boy that she really loved who broke her heart, and all these things that keep her away from her hometown. But then eventually those are the things that end up having to bring her back to town, and forcing characters to face the things that they don't want to face. My big thing is always making sure that where the character is at the beginning, it's a totally different person from where the character, totally different place from where the character is at the end. That character arc, right? that idea of this is the person in the old world, and by the time you get to the end, this person is fully rooted in their new world. So for me, it's really about the theme of letting that character figure out what is their purpose, and figuring out whatever their trauma is that they're working through, whatever their issues with their family are, whatever that may be, but allowing that character to have that sort of revolution, and allowing them to be in one place when the book starts and then in a totally different place by the time the book ends. And what's cool about writing a series that I've found is that the character arc does not end with the end of that person's story, right? Because Ivy Falls is it's all around the town, but it's three like companion novels based on characters I introduced in the first book. But the characters from the first book are very much embedded in the second book. Like, you still see them growing and changing in the second book, and you'll see that again with the characters I introduced in the second book and the third book. So it's very cool to sort of be able to use a 3-book series to create this massive arc for your characters. And I think that that's important too. Like, I think readers really want to see the character change and have that evolution.
Interesting to meet you in the Ivy Falls, people. So let's support Miss Amy True. But before we go on, I'm inviting you, please, to visit my merchandise. Book 101 merchandise, people. It's available on Etsy. I do have toddler short, unisex premium sweatshirt, denim bucket hat, and a lot more. So please do visit Book 101 merchandise. And of course, my ad 101 on our fourth season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chef in one of the five-star restaurant. No, five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. So please do listen Food 101. So Miss Amy, what roles does research play in enhancing Ivy Falls?
So Ivy Falls, I'm not going to share, but Ivy Falls is based on a real place, a place that is very near and dear to my heart. And the funny story about that is I've written like 3 other books with this kind of town in mind, and Ivy Falls is the first one that sold. so so I'm really glad to be able to bring it to life. But I think that research is important in the fact that you want to give authenticity to the characters. So, for instance, in Ivy Falls, the character is a contractor. I asked a lot of questions of friends that are contractors. I watched a lot of YouTube videos. Like, there's a scene in the book where she's laying tile, and I spent hours watching YouTube videos on contractors actually laying tile. So when I describe it in the book, it's like really authentic, and it was really funny because my copy editor in the UK is like, I feel like I can go and like put tile in my bathroom now. Like, it was really funny. So to me, there's definitely a authenticity to trying to, like, whatever that field that character is in is, you want to make that feel real. But I think the other part about research too is, you know, you have a lot of leeway when you write a fictional town, right? Because you can like make your own map, and you can play with the logistics, and you can say how many people are in town and what they're famous for and all this kind of stuff. So that's the fun part about writing this for me, because when I write historical books, everything has to be like spot on, like everything, because you have people who read historical just sometimes just so they can write you an email and say, did you know that you got this? And I'm always like, well, sometimes this history is not always seen through the same lens. So we have lots of different views about how things were done. So writing historical books and research, a totally different thing than like writing a contemporary book. And when you write historical, like, I'm really big on author's notes and talking about like how I came to the idea and how I did my research and kind of where I played with things a little bit that weren't sort of, real to the time period, but, you sort of dance around that. So historical research, totally different thing. Like, my laptop is crazy with all of my different folders of all the crazy historical research I've done. But more with Ivy Falls, it was just more fun to like really play with this fictional town and to think about like, okay, what would be fun to have in this fictional town? Well, of course, a bakery. And I love doing this with my characters. My characters always have like one really funny little thing about them. And Torran is like a coffee fiend. So she drinks coffee all the time. And the bakery has these favorite little donuts that she has. So you see her in several scenes, like eating the donuts and drinking the coffee. And so I love to do that, for characters. But research totally different for history and historicals than it is for writing, like contemporary. But if you're going to have your character live in a vineyard, or you're going to have your character be a professional ski instructor, you still have to do the research to make sure that when you're describing what they're doing on the page, it feels authentic. So it's
Yes,
important. Yeah.
definitely. So, Miss Amy, what strategies can help in overcoming writer's block during writing Ivy Falls?
Yeah, you know what? I'm probably going to jinx myself here, but I've been okay with writer's block. I tend to be one of those types of people who's like, because maybe I was trained as a journalist, I like deadlines, so I kind of set deadlines for myself. So I may not come back to the page for a while. I may not sit down on my laptop. I'm not one of those writers who believes you have to write every day to like be a writer. But I think that for me, I tend to not get writer's block if I know where the story's going. It's only when I'm sort of stuck or I haven't plotted out the book enough that I tend to really struggle. And so what I find that really helps is to like walk away from the book, close a laptop, go for a walk. A lot of writers will tell you this, go for a long drive, because when your mind is not thinking about the story, all of a sudden ideas will pop into your head, right? You'll figure out how to, you write yourself into a corner and then you're driving down the road and something pops into your head and you're like, oh my gosh, that's how I'm going to fix that. You know what I mean? So you're pulling over and like typing in your notes on your phone, trying to figure out how to do it. So if you do have writer's block, I would suggest totally separating yourself from a laptop. Do something that you enjoy, go for a walk, do a hobby, anything that you can to sort of get out of the mindset. And I fully believe that once your body and your brain relaxes and you can sort of refill the well, that need and that fear of the writer's block sort of goes away. So definitely take time for yourself, take care of yourself. I'm very much into self-care and looking after yourself, but also to giving your time, your body, your brain time to rest and really refilling that well is really helps with writer's block.
Definitely. So, Miss Amy, what is your inspiring message for those aspiring writers out there?
I would just really say, kind of go back to what we originally talked about is, dedicate yourself to the story that you want to write. Sit down, write it from beginning to end. When I do signings, when I do events, when I do conferences, I talk to aspiring writers all the time. And it's always like, I write the first 3 chapters and then I go back and I rewrite the first 3 chapters. And my gentle advice to them is always like, you can't, edit what isn't there. You can't work with what's not there. So I'm always telling them, even if you think it's dribble, even if it's the sentences aren't anything you like, write the story from beginning to end. And then once you have the story, I always tell this joke and people always laugh about me, but I'm always like, take the story out of your head and put it on the page. You know what I mean? And that's the first draft is you basically telling you the story, right? It's not going to go to your agent. It's not going to go to your critique partners. Nobody's going to look at it and judge you if your spelling's wrong, your sentence structure's poor, whatever. That first draft is you just telling yourself the story, taking the idea out of your head again and putting it on the page. So give yourself that chance to tell yourself that story, get it on the page. And then once it's there, you can really build upon it. I'm a really big believer in like a story is like building a house, right? You got to get the structure in place first, right? And then you put up the walls and then you put in the windows and then you add the paint and the roof and all of that kind of stuff. You can't do anything with that without a solid structure. So just write from beginning to end, get it on the page, and then you can go back and play with it and work on other things. But don't let yourself get caught in sort of that whirlpool of, oh, I want to rewrite those 3 chapters over and over again, because you won't get anywhere. So just really focus on getting the story out of your head and on the page, and then you can fix it after that. But really, that's the thing is tell the story to yourself first.
Yes, very well said, Miss Amy. And lastly, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Sure. My two YA historical books. My first book is Nothing But Sky. The second book is Across a Broken Shore, and I'm writing those books as Amy Trueblood. And then Meet Me in Ivy Falls, which is out June 25th, US paperback, and then July 4th, and UK paperback and ebook on July 4th. And you can follow me on the socials. I am on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok as at A True Books. And my website is amytruebloodauthor.com. And there are links on there for all of my books and information about all my writing details, my events, all that kind of stuff. And the great thing is I'm a real music person. All my books have playlists. So my UK publisher has been kind enough to allow me to put the playlist for Meet Me in Ivy Falls in the back of the book. So I will definitely be adding that to my webpage as well, so that listeners can see it, download it, and then it will also be available once the book is out for wide release. I will also upload it to Spotify so that listeners can listen to it on Spotify too. So lots of fun.
Congratulations again, Miss
Thank
Amy,
you.
and looking forward for next more books to come. You are most welcome to come back and promote them here in Book
Thank
101
you. Thank you,
Review.
Daniel. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, and please do visit my Food 101 merchandise, people. If I have Book 101 merchandise, I do have also on my Food 101. Miss Amy, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
More to come, people. See you soon.